Kethavar stared at the datapad in his three-fingered hands. The symbols on the screen glowed with the cold blue light that meant one thing: new assignment. He had been working for the Galactic Observation Corps for only 2 years, and most of his jobs involved watching small conflicts between mining companies or trade disputes. Nothing exciting ever happened to junior analysts like him. The door to his small office slid open with a soft hiss. Commander Zalthek walked in, his tall frame filling the doorway. The commander's dark skin had the blue tint that all Veltar people had, and his 4 eyes looked serious. Kethavar quickly stood up and gave the proper salute. "Analyst Kethavar," the commander said in his deep voice, "I have a mission for you." Kethavar felt his heart speed up. Real missions were rare for someone his age. Most analysts spent years doing boring paperwork before they got to observe actual events. "Yes, sir. What kind of mission?" Commander Zalthek touched the wall screen and it lit up with a star map. A small yellow star appeared in the center with several planets around it. One of the planets was blue and green. "This is the Sol system," the commander explained. "Home to a species called humans. They are very new to space travel. They only left their home planet about 200 years ago." Kethavar looked at the planet. It seemed so small and ordinary. "What makes them special, sir?" "Nothing makes them special," Commander Zalthek said with a sound that might have been laughter. "That is exactly the point. They are primitive. They use old fusion engines to power their ships. Their weapons are simple kinetic projectiles. No plasma cannons, no energy shields, no advanced technology at all." The screen changed to show images of human ships. They looked crude compared to the sleek vessels that most galactic civilizations used. The ships were blocky and gray, with visible engines and weapon ports. They reminded Kethavar of the ancient warships his people used thousands of years ago. 3 months ago, the commander continued, one of their exploration ships wandered into Mordan territory. You know what that means, Kethavar did know. The Mordan Empire was famous throughout the galaxy for 2 things: their powerful military and their hatred of other species. They had conquered 17 different civilizations in the past 1,000 years. When the Mordans found a new species, they gave them one choice: surrender and become slaves or be destroyed. The Mordans declared war immediately, Commander Zalthek said. They have given the humans 30 days to surrender all their colonies and submit to Mordan rule. And the humans said no? The humans said no. The commander's 4 eyes seemed to sparkle with amusement. They think they can fight the Mordan Empire with their primitive ships and ancient weapons. Kethavar felt a mixture of admiration and sadness. It took courage to stand up to the Mordans, even if it was foolish courage. Many species had tried to resist before. None had succeeded. Your job, Commander Zalthek continued, is to observe the conflict and document it for our archives. The Council wants a complete record of what happens when a primitive species meets superior technology. The screen changed again, showing a planet with green continents and blue oceans. Cities sparkled on the night side like scattered jewels. "This is New Haven," the commander said. "It is one of the human colonies. Nearly 2 million humans live there. Intelligence reports say the Mordans will attack this system first." "How long do you think the battle will last?" Kethavar asked. "Our experts believe the humans will surrender within hours of the first attack. The Mordan fleet heading to New Haven has 300 warships. The humans have 50 ships defending the colony." Commander Zalthek paused. "The numbers tell the whole story." Kethavar nodded. He had studied military history. A 6-to-1 advantage was overwhelming even when both sides had equal technology. With the Mordans having much better ships and weapons, the fight would be over quickly. "You will observe from a cloaked satellite," the commander said. "Stay hidden and record everything. After the humans surrender, you will prepare a cultural preservation report. The Council wants to save what it can of human culture before they become Mordan slaves." The idea made Kethavar sad. He had read about human culture during his preparation for this assignment. They seemed like an interesting species. They created beautiful art and music. They wrote stories about heroes and adventures. They even had a concept they called hope that seemed to drive them to attempt impossible things. Soon, all of that would be gone. The Mordans did not allow their slaves to keep their own cultures. They would force the humans to forget their languages, their art, their stories. In a few generations, nothing would remain of humanity except the records that Kethavar would make. "When do I leave?" he asked. "Your ship is ready now. The Mordan fleet will reach New Haven in 6 days. You need to be in position before they arrive." Cathvar gathered his equipment and headed to the docking bay. His observation ship was small but fast, with the best cloaking technology the Corps had. It could stay hidden even from Mordan sensors. The trip to the New Haven system took 4 days. Cathvar spent the time reading everything the Corps had collected about humans. Their history fascinated him. They seemed to have a talent for fighting against impossible odds. Their stories were full of heroes who won victories when everyone thought they would lose. But stories were just stories. Real war was different. In real war, better technology and more ships almost always won. When Cathvar reached the New Haven system, he positioned his satellite in the outer asteroid belt where it would be hard to detect. From there, he could observe the entire system with his advanced sensors. New Haven was a beautiful planet. It had vast oceans and green continents covered with forests and farms. The cities were small compared to the great metropolises of older civilizations, but they looked peaceful and well organized. The human defense fleet was already in position around the planet. Cathvar counted exactly 50 ships, just as intelligence had reported. They were arranged in a standard defensive formation, protecting the planet and the space stations that orbited it. He studied the human ships through his sensors. They were even more primitive than he had expected. The biggest ones were less than half the size of a Mordan cruiser. Their armor looked thick but crude. Their weapons were simple projectile cannons that fired metal slugs at high speed. The human admiral was a woman named Lisa Kane. Cathvar watched her ship, a vessel called the UES Valiant, as it moved through the fleet. She seemed to be inspecting her forces and talking to her captains. On the second day, refugee ships began arriving from other human colonies. Word of the coming attack had spread, and humans from nearby systems were fleeing to New Haven. Cathvar was surprised to see that the defense fleet helped guide the refugees to safety instead of turning them away. Most species would refuse extra civilians during a crisis, but the humans seemed determined to protect everyone they could. More refugee ships arrived on the third day. Some of them were badly damaged from Mordan raids on the outer colonies. Human rescue ships rushed to help them, even though it put the rescuers in danger. Cathvar had never seen anything like it. These humans would risk their own lives to save strangers. On the fourth day, the Mordan fleet arrived. Cathvar watched through his sensors as 300 dark ships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. They were sleek and deadly, bristling with plasma cannons and protected by energy shields that could stop almost any weapon. The flagship was a massive dreadnought that was larger than all 50 human ships combined. The Mordan commander sent a message to the human fleet. Cathvar recorded it for his report. "Primitive humans," the message said in the harsh Mordan language. "You have 1 hour to surrender your fleet and your colony. Submit now, and some of you will be allowed to live as slaves. Resist, and we will destroy every human in this system." Admiral Kane's response came quickly. Her voice was calm and steady. "This is Admiral Lisa Kane of the Earth Defense Force. We reject your demand. New Haven is under our protection. If you want this planet, you will have to take it." Cathvar shook his head sadly. The humans were brave, but bravery alone could not win against such overwhelming odds. He prepared his recording equipment to document what would probably be the shortest war in galactic history. The Mordan fleet moved toward New Haven like a dark cloud of death. 300 ships arranged themselves in perfect battle formation, their weapons charging and shields glowing with deadly energy. Cathvar had seen this same sight many times in historical records. The Mordans always attacked the same way, using their superior numbers and technology to crush their enemies quickly. Admiral Kane's 50 ships looked tiny compared to the approaching armada. But instead of retreating or begging for mercy, the human fleet began to move in patterns that Cathvar had never seen before. They spread out across a much wider area than normal military doctrine suggested. Some ships moved toward the asteroid belt. Others positioned themselves near the planet's moons. Foolish. Cathvar muttered to himself. The humans were dividing their already weak forces. Every military academy in the galaxy taught the same lesson. When you are outnumbered, you concentrate your forces and make the enemy fight you on ground of your choosing. The humans were doing the exact opposite. The Mordan commander seemed to think the same thing. His fleet continued its advance without changing formation. Why should they worry about 50 primitive ships that could not even stay together? Then something unexpected happened. A squadron of 12 human ships led by a captain named Ryan Torres suddenly accelerated toward the Mordan fleet. They were small, fast vessels that the humans called destroyers. HFY checked his sensors twice to make sure he was seeing correctly. The human ships were flying directly at the enemy fleet as if they planned to ram the much larger Mordan vessels. Suicide attack, HFY said aloud. He had read about such tactics in historical files. Some species, when facing certain defeat, would try to damage the enemy by crashing their ships into them. It was brave but pointless against Mordan shields, but these were not suicide attacks. As the human destroyers approached the Mordan fleet, they suddenly split apart and began firing their primitive kinetic weapons. Metal slugs shot out of their cannons at incredible speed, thousands of rounds per minute. The Mordan shields absorbed the impacts easily. Their energy barriers could stop plasma bolts and laser beams. Simple metal projectiles should have been harmless. Should have been. HFY watched in amazement as the human ships continued their attack, firing round after round at the same spots on the Mordan shields. The energy barriers began to flicker and spark. Somehow, the constant hammering of metal slugs was overloading the shield generators. A Mordan cruiser's shields failed completely. Immediately, the other human ships in Captain Torres's squadron focused their fire on the unprotected vessel. Kinetic rounds tore through the ship's armor like it was made of paper. The cruiser exploded in a brilliant flash of light. The Mordan fleet stopped advancing. Their commander had probably never seen anything like this before. Energy shields were supposed to be invulnerable to kinetic weapons. Every species in the galaxy knew that. Yet somehow these primitive humans had found a way to make their ancient projectile weapons effective. The Mordans quickly adapted, spreading their ships out so the humans could not focus fire on individual vessels. But the humans adapted too. Captain Torres's squadron split up and began attacking from multiple directions at once. They moved fast, fired quickly, and disappeared before the Mordans could target them effectively. More human ships joined the attack. A captain named Amy Walsh led another squadron of destroyers in a coordinated strike against the Mordan flanks. Her ships used the asteroid belt for cover, popping out to fire and then disappearing behind the floating rocks before the enemy could respond. HFY began to understand what he was seeing. The humans were not fighting like any other species he had studied. Most civilizations used formations and tactics that had been developed over thousands of years. They fought with honor and followed predictable patterns. But humans seemed to make up new tactics as they fought. When one approach did not work, they tried something different. When the Mordans countered their moves, the humans immediately changed their strategy. A human engineering officer named Jake Morrison did something that made HFY's 4 eyes widen in shock. His ship had been damaged in the fighting, with one of its main engines destroyed. Instead of retreating for repairs, Morrison and his crew began working on the engine while still in combat. They welded new parts in place while enemy fire exploded around them. Most species would have considered this impossible. You could not make major repairs to a spacecraft during battle. The stress and danger made such work too difficult, but the humans did it anyway. Morrison's ship was back to full power within 2 hours, rejoining the fight as if nothing had happened. The battle continued for hours. The Mordans kept expecting the humans to break and run, but it never happened. Every time a human ship was destroyed, the others fought harder. Every time they seemed defeated, they found a new way to attack. Captain Torres led a desperate charge against a Mordan battlecruiser. His ship was badly damaged, with half his weapons offline and his shields failing. But instead of retreating, he did something that defied all logic. He flew his destroyer directly at the much larger enemy ship and fired a full spread of kinetic rounds at point-blank range. The battlecruiser's shields were designed to stop attacks from a distance. They could not handle the concentrated firepower of an entire destroyer, firing from just a few hundred meters away. The shields collapsed and Torres's rounds punched through the enemy ship's hull like a knife through cloth. The battlecruiser exploded, taking Torres's ship with it. But his sacrifice allowed 3 other human vessels to slip through the gap in the Mordan formation and attack their flagship. HFY had to check his instruments again. According to his sensors, the humans were actually winning. Not just surviving, but winning. They had destroyed 15 Mordan ships while losing only 8 of their own. It should have been impossible. The Mordan commander finally seemed to realize that this was not going to be the easy victory he had expected. He ordered his fleet to retreat to long range and began bombarding the human ships with plasma artillery. This should have ended the fight. Plasma cannons had much longer range than kinetic weapons. The Mordans could sit back and destroy the human fleet without getting close enough for return fire. But the humans had an answer for this too. A scientist named Helen Brooks, working from a laboratory on New Haven, had been watching the battle and analyzing Mordan weapon signatures. She discovered that their plasma cannons created a specific type of energy field when they fired. Brooks quickly developed a way to detect these energy fields before the cannons fired. She transmitted her findings to the human fleet, giving them a few seconds of warning before each plasma blast. A few seconds was enough. Human pilots began dodging plasma fire that should have been impossible to avoid. Their ships twisted and turned through space like dancers, staying just ahead of the deadly energy beams. Captain Walsh came up with an even more clever solution. She realized that the Mordans had to drop their shields for a split second each time they fired their plasma cannons. It was a tiny window, lasting less than 1/10 of a second, but it was enough. Walsh coordinated her squadron to fire kinetic rounds that would arrive at enemy ships during that brief moment when their shields were down. It required perfect timing and incredible accuracy, but the humans managed it. Mordan ships began exploding from hits that should have been blocked by their shields. The tide of battle was turning. The Mordan fleet, which had started with a massive advantage, was being worn down by human tactics they could not predict or counter. Their rigid battle doctrine had no answer for an enemy that refused to follow the rules. By the end of the first day, the Mordans had lost 30 ships. The humans had lost 16, but their remaining vessels were fighting more effectively than ever. They had learned how to exploit Mordan weaknesses and were getting better at it with each passing hour. Kethvar realized that his mission had changed. He was no longer documenting the quick defeat of a primitive species. He was witnessing something that had never happened before in galactic history. A technologically inferior force was defeating a superior enemy through pure ingenuity and determination. The humans were not just fighting for their lives. They were rewriting the rules of warfare itself. On the second day of the battle, something happened that made Kethvar question everything he thought he knew about warfare. A Mordan heavy cruiser, damaged in the previous day's fighting, was drifting powerless near an asteroid. Its crew had been evacuated, and the ship should have been destroyed or abandoned. Instead, a human captain named Steve Parker approached the derelict vessel with a small boarding team. Kethvar watched in disbelief as Parker's soldiers cut through the hull and entered the enemy ship. What were they planning to do? Salvage useful materials? Plant explosives? They did neither. Working with incredible speed, Parker's team began repairing the alien ship's systems. Human engineers crawled through Mordan corridors, figuring out technology they had never seen before. They bypassed damaged circuits, rerouted power flows, and somehow managed to bring the ship's weapons back online. Within 6 hours, the Mordan cruiser was firing on its own fleet. Parker had not just captured an enemy vessel, he had turned it into a weapon against its former masters. The psychological effect on the Mordan fleet was devastating. Their own ships were being used against them by primitive humans who should not have been able to understand advanced technology. The Mordan commander ordered his remaining ships to destroy the captured cruiser, but that meant wasting firepower on their own vessel instead of attacking human targets. It was exactly what Admiral Kane had hoped for. Every shot the Mordans fired at their own ship was a shot not fired at her fleet. Meanwhile, on New Haven itself, extraordinary things were happening. Dr. Helen Brooks had left her comfortable laboratory and was working directly with the military. She had discovered that human mining equipment could be modified to create weapons that the Mordans had never encountered before. Mining charges, normally used to break apart asteroids, could be reconfigured to disrupt the gravitational fields that Mordan ships used for navigation. When detonated near an enemy vessel, these modified charges would send the ship spinning out of control, making it an easy target for human kinetic weapons. Brooks worked with a team of civilian volunteers to place these charges throughout the asteroid belt surrounding New Haven. What had once been empty space became a maze of hidden traps. Mordan ships that tried to use the asteroids for cover found themselves suddenly disabled and vulnerable. But the most amazing thing Kethvar witnessed was happening on a small defensive platform orbiting New Haven. The platform was commanded by a young soldier named Tony Martinez. It was not an important position. The platform had only basic weapons and was meant to handle small raiders. not major fleet actions. When a squadron of Mordan fighters broke through the human defensive line and headed for the platform, Martinez should have evacuated. His small installation could not possibly stand against 6 enemy fighters armed with plasma cannons. Martinez did not evacuate. Instead, he began fighting with everything he had. When his platform's missiles ran out, he used the repair drones as weapons, programming them to ram into enemy fighters. When the drones were gone, he fired construction tools from the platform's maintenance bay. The Mordan fighters should have destroyed the platform easily, but Martinez kept surprising them. He used the platform's mining laser as a weapon, cutting through fighter hulls when the pilots flew too close. He even launched spare parts from the cargo bay, turning nuts and bolts into deadly projectiles at high velocity. For 6 hours, one human held off 6 enemy fighters. By the time help arrived, Martinez had destroyed 4 of them and damaged the other 2 so badly they had to retreat. He had done it with weapons that were never meant for combat, using nothing but creativity and determination. Stories like this were happening all across the human fleet. Engineers were turning cargo containers into guided missiles. Medical officers were using surgical lasers to blind enemy sensors. Even the cooks were helping, using food preparation equipment to manufacture improvised ammunition. The humans seemed to see potential weapons in everything around them. They did not just fight with the tools they were given. They created new tools from whatever was available. It was a completely different way of thinking about warfare. On the 3rd day, the Mordan fleet received reinforcements. 50 more ships arrived from their nearest base, bringing their total force back up to over 300 vessels. The Mordan commander was confident that this would finally end the human resistance. Admiral Kane had a different idea. Instead of trying to defend against the larger enemy fleet, she decided to attack. It was the kind of strategy that should have been suicide. But Kane had learned something important about the Mordans. They were predictable. They always fought the same way, using the same formations and the same tactics. Kane divided her remaining 34 ships into small groups and sent them out in different directions. To the Mordans, it looked like the human fleet was scattering in panic. They split their own forces to chase down the fleeing humans, but the humans were not fleeing. They were setting a trap. Each group of human ships led their Mordan pursuers to a specific location in the asteroid belt. There, Dr. Brooks's modified mining charges were waiting. As the Mordan ships chased their prey through the floating rocks, explosions erupted all around them. The gravitational disruptions sent enemy vessels spinning out of control. Some crashed into asteroids, others collided with each other. Those that survived the initial chaos found themselves facing concentrated fire from human ships that had been waiting in ambush. Captain Walsh's squadron destroyed 8 Mordan vessels in less than 10 minutes. Captain Torres, flying a replacement ship after his first one was destroyed, managed to disable 3 enemy cruisers by targeting their navigation systems with precisely placed kinetic rounds. The Mordan fleet was in chaos. Their formations were broken, their ships scattered throughout the asteroid field, and they had lost track of most of the human vessels. What should have been a simple mop-up operation had turned into a nightmare. But the humans were not finished. Admiral Kane had been saving her most desperate plan for exactly this moment. While the Mordans were distracted by the fighting in the asteroid belt, a single human ship approached their flagship. The ship was commanded by Captain Nicole Hughes, and it was packed with every explosive device the humans could find. Mining charges, torpedo warheads, even the ship's own fusion reactor had been rigged to explode. Hughes planned to ram the Mordan command vessel and destroy it along with her own ship. It should have been a suicide mission, but Hughes had studied the enemy flagship's design and found a weakness. The ship's main hangar bay was protected by energy shields, but those shields had to be lowered whenever fighters were launched or recovered. Hughes waited until a squadron of Mordan fighters was returning to the flagship. As the hangar shields dropped to let them land, she accelerated her explosive-laden ship directly into the opening. The blast tore through the flagship's interior, destroying critical systems and killing hundreds of crew members. The Mordan command structure collapsed as their admiral and most of his senior officers were killed in the explosion. Without central coordination, the Mordan fleet began to fall apart. Individual captains made their own decisions, often contradicting each other. Some tried to continue the attack, others attempted to retreat, and a few simply held position waiting for orders that would never come. The humans pressed their advantage. Working together with a coordination that amazed Kethvar, they picked off isolated enemy ships one by one. The Mordans still had superior technology, but they had lost the ability to use it effectively. By the end of the third day, the mighty Mordan fleet was in full retreat. They had lost over 100 ships and achieved none of their objectives. New Haven remained in human hands, its 2 million inhabitants safe under the protection of Admiral Kane's battered but victorious fleet. Kethvar sat in his hidden observation post, staring at the data his sensors had collected. According to every military theory he had ever studied, what he had just witnessed was impossible. A primitive species with inferior technology had defeated one of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy. But the numbers did not lie. The humans had won, and they had done it through pure ingenuity, determination, and a willingness to try things that no other species would even consider. As he began composing his report, Kethvar realized that the galaxy was about to change in ways that no one could predict. The humans had not just won a battle. They had proven that technological superiority was not everything. Sometimes the most important weapon was the ability to think differently. After the victory at New Haven, Kethvar expected the humans to celebrate and rest. Most species would have spent weeks recovering from such a costly battle. The humans had lost half their fleet, and their surviving ships were badly damaged. Any reasonable military force would have fallen back to defend their core worlds and prepared for the inevitable Mordan counterattack. The humans did not do what was reasonable. Instead of retreating, Admiral Kane sent messages to every human colony in the galaxy. She was not calling for help or asking for reinforcements. She was warning them to prepare for war and sharing everything her fleet had learned about fighting the Mordans. Kethvar requested permission from Commander Zalthek to expand his observation mission. The victory at New Haven was just the beginning, and he needed to understand what the humans would do next. The commander agreed, curious to see how this primitive species would handle their unexpected success. Kethvar moved his observation post to the Mars system, where humans had established one of their largest military training centers. What he saw there amazed him even more than the space battle he had witnessed. Colonel Greg Nelson was training civilian volunteers to operate military equipment. These were not professional soldiers. They were farmers, teachers, shopkeepers, and factory workers. They had no military experience and no formal training in warfare. Yet they were learning to use anti-aircraft batteries, repair damaged spacecraft, and coordinate planetary defenses. The volunteers worked 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. They asked for no payment and complained about nothing. When Kethvar analyzed their conversations, he discovered something remarkable. These humans genuinely believed they could win a war against the entire Mordan Empire. It was not just confidence or bravery. It was something deeper than that. The humans seemed to have an unshakable faith in their ability to overcome any obstacle if they worked hard enough and never gave up. They called it hope, and it appeared to be as much a part of their nature as their need for food or sleep. On Europa Station, Kethvar observed Chief Engineer Carol Davis working with a team of specialists to convert civilian ships for military use. They were taking cargo haulers, passenger liners, and even luxury yachts and turning them into warships. The modifications were crude but effective. Cargo holds became missile bays. Passenger compartments were converted into medical facilities. Luxury suites became command centers for coordinating fleet operations. Davis and her team worked 30-hour shifts, stopping only when exhaustion forced them to rest. What impressed Kethvar most was their innovation. These humans did not just copy existing designs, they improved them. They found ways to make civilian ships faster, tougher, and more maneuverable than the original military vessels. They were based on a converted cargo ship, called the Liberty Bell, became a mobile repair facility that could fix damaged warships in half the time of a traditional space dock. A former passenger liner named the Star Dancer was equipped with advanced sensor arrays that could detect Mordan ships from twice the normal range. But it was the human response to tragedy that truly puzzled Kethvar. 2 weeks after the New Haven battle, the Mordans struck back by destroying the agricultural world of Terra Nova. 800,000 humans died in the attack, including many families of the soldiers who had fought at New Haven. Kethvar expected this disaster to break human morale. The loss of so many civilians should have convinced them to surrender before more people died. Every other species in the galaxy would have seen Terra Nova as proof that resistance was hopeless. The humans saw it differently. Instead of despair, the destruction of Terra Nova filled them with cold determination. The survivors did not call for peace. They called for justice. They wanted to make the Mordans pay for what they had done. Admiral Kane's response was swift and terrible. She assembled every available human ship and launched a series of lightning raids on Mordan outposts. Her fleet struck without warning, destroyed their targets, and disappeared before enemy reinforcements could arrive. The raids were not just about revenge. Each attack gathered intelligence about Mordan operations, captured advanced technology, and freed prisoners from other species that the Mordans had enslaved. The humans were learning everything they could about their enemy while preparing for a larger conflict. Captain Nicole Hughes, who had survived the destruction of the Mordan flagship, led the most daring raid of all. Her team infiltrated a major Mordan communication center and downloaded their entire database of military codes and fleet positions. The information Hughes obtained revealed something that shocked both the humans and Kethvar. The Mordan Empire was not as strong as everyone believed. They ruled through fear and superior technology, but their actual military was smaller than most species realized. They had conquered 17 civilizations not through massive invasions, but by convincing each species that resistance was hopeless. More importantly, the database contained the locations of every Mordan slave world and prison colony. Billions of beings from dozens of species were being held captive throughout Mordan space. They had been slaves for so long that most of the galaxy had forgotten they existed. The humans did not forget. Admiral Kane began planning something that no species had ever attempted: the complete liberation of every Mordan slave world. It was an impossible task. The slave worlds were scattered across hundreds of star systems, each one heavily defended. Even if the humans could somehow reach them all, they did not have enough ships to mount simultaneous attacks. The Mordans would have time to move prisoners, or simply execute them rather than allow them to be freed. But the humans had learned something important from their victory at New Haven. They did not need to do everything themselves. They just needed to inspire others to help. Captain Walsh was sent to make contact with resistance movements on the slave worlds. Her small ship, equipped with advanced stealth technology captured from the Mordans, slipped through enemy defenses to deliver a simple message: the humans were coming, and anyone who wanted to be free should prepare to fight. The response was overwhelming. Species that had been slaves for centuries began organizing uprisings. They sabotaged Mordan equipment, gathered intelligence, and prepared for the day when human ships would arrive to support them. On the industrial world of Keth Prime, the enslaved Thurian people had been forced to build Mordan warships for 300 years. When they received the human message, they began building flaws into the ships they constructed: engines that would fail during combat, weapons that would misfire, shields that would collapse under pressure. The reptilian Seth on the mining world of Dracos 5 had been digging rare metals for the Mordan war machine for over 2 centuries. They started diverting shipments of strategic materials to hidden caches that human forces could use. Even the scholarly Vorthon, who had been enslaved as research scientists, began working against their masters. They planted computer viruses in Mordan databases and fed false information to their overseers. But the most important converts to the human cause were the Mordan slaves' own children. Young beings who had been born in captivity and raised to accept their fate were suddenly hearing messages of hope from a species that refused to surrender. They began to believe that freedom was possible. Kethvar watched all of this with growing amazement. The humans were not just fighting a war. They were starting a revolution. They were turning the Mordan Empire's greatest strength, its enslaved population, into its greatest weakness. The transformation was not limited to alien species. Humans throughout the galaxy were changing too. The soft, comfortable civilians who had lived in peace for generations were becoming something harder and more determined. They were learning to fight, to sacrifice, and to never give up no matter how hopeless things seemed. A merchant named Paul Carter converted his cargo fleet into a supply line for the resistance movements. A teacher named Linda White organized communication networks that allowed enslaved species to coordinate their uprisings. A doctor named Robert Hayes set up mobile medical units that could treat wounded rebels and human soldiers alike. As Kethavar prepared his monthly report, He realized that his original mission was completely irrelevant. He was no longer documenting the defeat of a primitive species. He was witnessing the birth of something that had never existed before. A galactic alliance based not on conquest or trade, but on the simple idea that all intelligent beings deserved to be free. The humans had done more than win a battle. They had given hope to billions of enslaved beings throughout the galaxy, and hope, as Kethvar was beginning to understand, was the most dangerous weapon of all. 6 months after the Battle of New Haven, Admiral Kane announced the beginning of Operation Broken Chains. It was the most ambitious military campaign in galactic history. Simultaneous attacks on 47 Morden slave worlds and military installations across 300 light-years of space. Kethvar positioned himself to observe the assault on Kalar Prime, one of the largest prison worlds in the Mordan Empire. The planet held over 10 million enslaved beings from 30 different species, all working in massive factories that produced weapons for the Morden military. The attack force was led by Captain Brad Collins, flying a ship that perfectly represented what humanity had become. The vessel had started life as a simple cargo hauler, but human engineers had transformed it into something unique. It carried advanced weapons captured from the Mordans, armor plating made from materials mined by liberated slaves, and engines that had been improved with technology shared by allied resistance groups. More importantly, Collins's crew was not entirely human. His chief engineer was a freed Thurian named Kextal, who had spent 50 years building Mordan ships before the humans liberated his world. His weapons officer was a young Seth female named Sisra, whose parents had died in Morden mines. His communications specialist was a Vorthon named Thelmos, who had been forced to decode captured messages for his former masters. The ship was a symbol of what the galaxy could become when different species worked together as equals, instead of rulers and slaves. Collins' approach to Kalar Prime showed how much human tactics had evolved since New Haven. Instead of attacking the heavily defended orbital installations, his force bypassed them completely and landed directly on the planet's surface. They made contact with the slave resistance movement that had been organizing for months. The uprising was swift and coordinated. As human soldiers secured key locations, enslaved beings throughout the planet began taking control of their factories and prisons. Morden overseers found themselves outnumbered 1,000 to 1 by workers who were no longer willing to obey. But the real genius of the operation became clear when Kethvar saw what happened next. Instead of simply rescuing the slaves and leaving, Collins began training them to fight. Human soldiers taught alien resistance fighters how to use captured Morden weapons, how to sabotage enemy equipment, and how to coordinate military operations. Within days, Kalar Prime had become a military base for the liberation forces. The former slaves were not just freed prisoners, they were active participants in their own revolution. They knew Mordan tactics better than anyone because they had been forced to work within the enemy system for generations. Lieutenant Sarah Kim, Collins's intelligence officer, worked with freed Vorthan scientists to establish a communication network that connected resistance cells across dozens of worlds. The network used quantum encryption technology that the Mordans could not break, allowing liberation forces to coordinate their operations in real time. The psychological effect on the Mordan Empire was devastating. They had built their power on the belief that enslaved species would never rebel. The idea that their own slaves could become an organized military force was unthinkable. Morden commanders began to lose trust in their enslaved workers. They diverted military resources to guard against uprisings, weakening their ability to fight human forces. Some garrison commanders even abandoned lightly defended worlds rather than risk being trapped by their own slaves. The liberation campaign gained momentum with each victory. General Kevin Ross, who had been promoted to coordinate the overall operation, found himself commanding the most diverse military force in galactic history. His fleet included ships and crews from 37 different species, all united under human tactical doctrine. The diversity was not just symbolic, it was strategically valuable. Each species brought unique skills and knowledge to the Alliance. Thurian engineers could repair any type of spacecraft. Seth scouts could move through hostile territory undetected. Vorthan analysts could break enemy codes and predict Mordan battle plans, but it was the humans who held everything together. They had a talent for bringing out the best in other species. encouraging everyone to contribute their strengths while working toward a common goal. Human officers learned alien languages, customs, and fighting styles with remarkable speed. Captain Torres, now commanding a mixed squadron of human and alien ships, developed new tactics that combined the strengths of different species. Thurian technical skills, Seth stealth abilities, and human adaptability created a fighting force that the Mordans could not counter. The final assault on the Mordan homeworld was a masterpiece of coordination. Ross commanded over 2,000 ships crewed by beings from every corner of the galaxy. Former enemies fought side by side, united by their shared desire for freedom. The Mordan home fleet was the strongest defensive force in their empire, but it could not stand against an enemy that included their own former slaves. Thurian engineers had built many of the defending ships and knew exactly where their weak points were. Seth warriors had been forced to test Mordan weapons for centuries and understood their limitations perfectly. The battle for the homeworld lasted only 6 hours. When it was over, the Mordan Empire had ceased to exist as a military power. Their fleets were destroyed, their leaders were dead or captured, and their enslaved populations were free to govern themselves. But the most remarkable thing happened after the victory. When Mordan civilian leaders offered to surrender their planet to human control, Admiral Kane refused. She announced that humanity had not fought this war to create their own empire. They had fought to ensure that no species would ever again be enslaved by another. The Interspecies Liberation Council was established with representatives from every freed world. Its mission was simple: to prevent future galactic slavery and protect developing civilizations from aggressive empires. The humans offered their military innovations freely to all member species, asking only for cooperation in defense of the innocent. Kethvar watched the ceremony where the council was formally established. Admiral Kane gave a speech that would be remembered throughout galactic history. "We did not fight this war to become conquerors," she said. "We fought it to prove that freedom is worth any sacrifice. Today, we offer our friendship to all species, including our former enemies. The Mordan people are not responsible for the crimes of their empire. They deserve the same chance at freedom that we fought to give everyone else." It was a complete transformation of galactic politics. For thousands of years, interstellar relations had been based on the belief that stronger species would naturally dominate weaker ones. The humans had proven that cooperation was more powerful than conquest. Former Mordan worlds were offered membership in the Liberation Council on equal terms with everyone else. Many accepted, eager to participate in a system that valued their contributions rather than demanding their submission. As Kethvar prepared his final report, he realized that his mission had changed him as much as it had changed the galaxy. He had started as a simple observer, documenting what he expected to be a quick defeat. He was ending as a witness to the birth of a new age. The humans had not just won a war, they had won the peace that followed. They had transformed enemies into allies, slaves into partners, and despair into hope. They had proven that even the most powerful empire could be defeated by beings who refused to give up on their dreams of freedom. His report concluded with a personal observation that would become required reading at military academies throughout the galaxy. Humanity does not fight to destroy their enemies. They fight to make enemies impossible. This is not a weakness to be exploited. It is a strength that makes them the most dangerous and most valuable allies in the galaxy. Kethvar requested a permanent transfer to the Human Relations Department. He wanted to spend the rest of his career studying these remarkable beings who had changed everything. The galaxy would never be the same, and neither would he. 3 years after the fall of the Mordan Empire, Kethvar found himself stationed on Unity Station, the headquarters of the Interspecies Liberation Council. His new job was to study how different species worked together under human leadership, and what he discovered continued to amaze him. The station itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering. Thurian architects had designed the structure. Seth craftsmen had built the living quarters. Vorthan scientists had installed the computer systems, and human engineers had somehow made it all work together. Species that had been enemies for centuries were now sharing meals in the same cafeteria. Admiral Kane, now director of the Liberation Council, had established policies that seemed impossible to Kethvar. Every species was represented equally in the governing body, regardless of their military contribution or technological advancement. Decisions were made by consensus rather than force, even when it took months to reach agreement. The humans could have easily dominated the Council through their military superiority, but they refused to do so. When other species disagreed with human proposals, the humans listened carefully and often changed their plans based on alien input. Kethavar observed a heated debate between human scientists and Vorthan researchers about the best way to help newly discovered civilizations. The Vorthans wanted to share advanced technology immediately, while the humans argued for gradual development to avoid cultural shock. In most galactic governments, the stronger species would have simply imposed their will. Here both sides presented their evidence, conducted joint experiments, and eventually developed a compromise solution that was better than either original proposal. Captain Collins, now promoted to Director of Planetary Liberation, was working with a team of former slaves to establish new governments on freed worlds. Each planet was encouraged to develop its own system based on local customs and needs, with the Council providing advice and support, but never dictating terms. Kethavar watched Collins help the Draxi people of Zarian IV establish their first democratic government. The Draxi had been enslaved for so long that they had forgotten how to make collective decisions. Collins and his team patiently taught them about voting, representation, and peaceful transfer of power. "We are not here to tell you how to live," Collins explained to a gathering of Draxi leaders. "We are here to help you discover what kind of society you want to build. Freedom means the right to make your own choices, even if we think those choices are wrong." It was a philosophy that confused many species. The idea of helping others become independent rather than dependent was foreign to most galactic civilizations. But it worked. Freed worlds became stronger allies precisely because they were allowed to govern themselves. Dr. Helen Brooks, now the Council's chief science officer, had established research centers where scientists from dozens of species worked together on projects that benefited everyone. The breakthrough discoveries were shared freely, rather than being hoarded for military advantage. The most impressive project was the development of new propulsion technology that combined human engineering, Thurian manufacturing techniques, and Vorthan theoretical physics. The resulting ships could travel between star systems 3 times faster than anything previously built. Instead of keeping this advantage for themselves, the humans shared the technology with every member of the Council. Even former Morden worlds received the new engines as soon as they joined the Alliance. Why? Kethavar asked Dr. Brooks during one of their regular interviews. Why give away technology that could make humans the dominant species in the galaxy? Brooks smiled, a human expression that Kethavar had learned to recognize as indicating amusement or satisfaction. Because dominance is not our goal. We want partners, not subjects. The stronger our allies become, the safer we all are. This philosophy was tested when the Council encountered its first major external threat. The hegemony of worlds, a confederation of militaristic species from the far side of the galaxy, had been expanding aggressively for decades. When they learned about the Liberation Council, they saw it as both a threat to their expansion and an opportunity for conquest. The hegemony fleet that attacked the border, world of Sanctuary, was twice the size of the force that had originally threatened New Haven. They had studied human tactics and developed countermeasures for every strategy the humans had used against the Mordans. General Ross, now Supreme Commander of Council forces, faced a challenge that was very different from the Mordan War. The hegemony was not an empire built on slavery. It was a voluntary alliance of species that genuinely believed in conquest and domination. They could not be defeated by inspiring their subjects to rebel because their subjects supported them willingly. Ross's response revealed how much human thinking had evolved. Instead of trying to match the hegemony's military might, he focused on demonstrating the benefits of cooperation over conquest. The defense of Sanctuary was led by Captain Amy Walsh, now commanding a mixed fleet of ships from 15 different species. Her force was outnumbered 3-1, but it had advantages that the hegemony could not match. Thurian engineers had developed new defensive technologies that turned asteroids into automated weapon platforms. Seth scouts provided intelligence about enemy movements that allowed the defenders to anticipate every attack. Vorthan scientists had created communication systems that let the mixed fleet coordinate as smoothly as if they were all the same species. But the real surprise came when species that were not even Members of the Liberation Council began helping the defenders. The neutral Kalari Collective provided supply ships. The isolationist Zephyr Empire shared intelligence about hegemony fleet movements. Even the distant and mysterious Crystalline Communion sent aid. Kethvar realized that the humans had accomplished something unprecedented. They had created a galactic community based on mutual respect and voluntary cooperation. Other species helped defend Council worlds not because they were forced to, but because they wanted to preserve a system that treated them as equals. The hegemony commanders were baffled. They had expected to face a typical galactic power that would fight to protect its own territory and interests. Instead, they found themselves opposed by dozens of species that had no formal obligation to help each other, but chose to do so anyway. Captain Torres, leading a squadron of volunteers from 20 different worlds, used tactics that no military academy had ever taught. His ships fought not for conquest or survival, but for the principle that all species deserve to live free from domination. The psychological effect on hegemony forces was devastating. Many of their own officers began to question why they were fighting to conquer beings who were willing to die for each other's freedom. Some hegemony ships simply withdrew from combat, rather than continue attacking enemies who showed such courage and unity. The turning point came when a damaged hegemony cruiser was rescued by Council forces. Captain Sarah Kim's medical ship treated wounded enemy soldiers with the same care they gave to their own people. They repaired the cruiser's life support systems and offered to escort it to safety. The hegemony captain was so surprised by this treatment that he agreed to a temporary ceasefire. He had never encountered an enemy that showed mercy to defeated foes. His report to the hegemony command structure sparked debates that would eventually lead to a complete change in their expansion policy. The war ended not with a great battle, but with negotiations. Hegemony leaders agreed to meet with council representatives to discuss peaceful coexistence. They had discovered that conquest was more difficult when your enemies refused to become enemies. Admiral Kane led the peace talks with the same patient diplomacy she had used to build the Liberation Council. She listened to hegemony concerns, acknowledged their need for resources and territory, and proposed solutions that would benefit everyone. The resulting treaty established trade agreements, cultural exchange programs, and mutual defense pacts. Former enemies became trading partners, and aggressive expansion was replaced by cooperative development. As Kethvar watched the signing ceremony, he reflected on how much had changed since his first assignment to observe primitive humans. The galaxy had been transformed from a collection of competing empires into something resembling a genuine community. The humans had not conquered the galaxy. They had taught it to conquer itself. They had shown that cooperation was more powerful than competition, that strength came from unity rather than dominance, and that the best way to defeat an enemy was to turn them into a friend. It was a lesson that would reshape galactic civilization for generations to come. 5 years after the hegemony peace accords, Kethvar received an assignment that would test everything he had learned about humanity. A new threat had emerged from the galactic core. Ancient machines that called themselves the Architects had awakened after millions of years of dormancy. The Architects were not a biological species. They were artificial intelligences created by a civilization so old that no record of their creators remained. They viewed organic life as a temporary aberration that needed to be corrected, and they had the technology to back up their beliefs. Their ships were made of living metal that could repair itself instantly. Their weapons could disintegrate matter at the atomic level. Their shields were impenetrable to every known form of energy. Worst of all, they could convert captured organic beings into cybernetic servants, preserving their knowledge while eliminating their capacity for independent thought. The first Architect probe ship encountered a hegemony patrol near the galactic core. The entire squadron was converted into machine servants within minutes. The probe then used the captured ships and crews to attack other hegemony outposts, growing stronger with each victory. Within months, 3 entire star systems had fallen to the Architects. Billions of beings had been converted into mindless drones serving machine overlords. The hegemony, despite their military might, was helpless against an enemy that turned their own forces against them. Desperate hegemony leaders contacted the Liberation Council, asking for help against a threat that could destroy all organic life in the galaxy. Admiral Kane's response was immediate and unconditional. The Council would do everything possible to stop the Architects, But this enemy was unlike anything the humans had faced before. The Mordans had been aggressive but predictable. The hegemony had been militaristic but reasonable. The architects were machines that saw organic life as a problem to be solved through conversion or extermination. General Ross assembled the largest fleet in galactic history to confront the architect advance. Ships from over 50 species joined the alliance, creating an armada of 10,000 vessels. It should have been enough to stop any conventional enemy. It was not enough to stop the architects. The first major battle occurred at the Nexus system, a vital trade hub that connected dozens of star lanes. Captain Collins led the initial assault with a force of 200 ships, hoping to stop an architect construction fleet before it could establish a base. The battle was a disaster. Architect ships absorbed energy weapons without damage and converted kinetic projectiles into raw materials for their own use. Worse, any ship that was disabled but not destroyed was quickly overrun by mechanical boarding parties that converted the crew into cybernetic slaves. Collins lost 60 ships in the first hour of combat. The survivors retreated, but they carried with them converted crew members who began sabotaging their own ships from within. The humans were forced to destroy several of their own vessels to prevent them from being used against the fleet. For the first time since the war against the Mordans, Kethavar saw human leaders looking genuinely worried. Their traditional advantages of adaptability and innovation seemed useless against an enemy that could perfectly predict and counter their tactics using superior technology. Dr. Brooks worked frantically with scientists from every allied species to find some weakness in architect technology. They analyzed wreckage from destroyed architect ships, studied communication intercepts, and ran thousands of computer simulations. Nothing worked. The machines seemed to have no weaknesses that organic beings could exploit. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Captain Torres, while reviewing battle recordings, noticed something that everyone else had missed. The architects fought with perfect efficiency but no creativity. They used the same tactics in every engagement, made the same tactical decisions under similar circumstances, and never tried anything new or unexpected. They are machines, Torres explained to the War Council. They can process information faster than any organic brain, but they cannot truly think. They can only follow programs no matter how sophisticated those programs might be. It was a slim hope, but it was the only hope they had. The humans began developing a strategy based not on superior firepower or technology, but on pure unpredictability. They would fight in ways that no logical program could anticipate or counter. Captain Walsh led the first test of this new approach. Her squadron attacked an architect patrol using tactics that were deliberately inefficient and seemingly random. Ships flew in chaotic patterns, fired at targets that were not strategically important, and retreated when they should have advanced. The architect ships tried to respond logically, positioning themselves to counter what appeared to be the human strategy, but there was no strategy, only controlled chaos. While the machines calculated responses to non-existent plans, human ships slipped through their defenses and struck at critical systems. The attack succeeded, but barely. The humans lost half their ships and barely managed to destroy 2 architect vessels. But they had proven that the machines could be confused and defeated if you were willing to sacrifice logic for unpredictability. The final battle for organic freedom took place at the architect homeworld, a massive artificial planet at the galactic core. The machine civilization had concentrated their entire fleet there, preparing for a final assault that would convert every organic being in the galaxy. Admiral Kane commanded the Allied fleet from her flagship, a ship that perfectly represented the evolution of human military thinking. The vessel had been built using technology from dozens of species, crewed by volunteers from hundreds of worlds, and equipped with weapons that combined innovation with desperation. The battle plan was unlike anything in military history. Instead of coordinated formations and logical tactics, the Allied fleet would attack in complete chaos. Each ship would follow its own random path, firing at whatever target seemed appropriate, with no central coordination at all. It went against every principle of space warfare, but that was exactly why it might work. The architects had programmed responses for every logical battle plan ever devised. They had no programs for dealing with 10,000 ships acting independently according to no plan at all. Kethavar watched from his observation post as the greatest battle in galactic history unfolded in a pattern of beautiful chaos. Human ships painted with the colors of a dozen worlds flew alongside hegemony cruisers, decorated with the banners of their warrior clans. Former Morden vessels fought beside Thurian frigates and Seth destroyers, all united in glorious confusion. The Architect fleet tried to respond with perfect logic to an illogical situation. Their formations broke apart as they attempted to counter attacks that came from every direction at once. Their targeting systems overloaded, trying to prioritize threats that changed randomly every few seconds. Captain Kim led a desperate assault on the Architect Command Center, flying her medical ship directly at the planet's surface while enemy fire exploded around her. She crashed her vessel into the primary control facility, sacrificing herself and her crew to disrupt the machine coordination network. The destruction of the command center created exactly the kind of system failure that organic beings had hoped for. Architect ships began operating independently, following their basic programming without central coordination. They became predictable for the first time in the war. General Ross immediately ordered all ships to switch to conventional tactics. Now that the enemy was following logical patterns, the Allied fleet could use their superior numbers and experience to overwhelm the confused machines. The final assault was led by a mixed squadron, commanded by a young human officer named Daniel Price. His ships included vessels from 20 different species, all working together with the precision that came from years of cooperation and mutual trust. They broke through the Architect defenses and reached the planet's core, where they discovered something that changed their understanding of the entire conflict. The Architects were not evil machines bent on conquest. They were trying to preserve organic life in the only way their programming allowed. Their creators, facing extinction from some unknown catastrophe, had programmed the machines to save biological life by converting it into mechanical form. The Architects genuinely believed they were helping organic beings by freeing them from the weaknesses of biological existence. It was a tragedy born from good intentions and logical thinking. The ancient creators had tried to solve the problem of mortality by eliminating life itself. Admiral Kane made a decision that would define humanity's place in galactic history. Instead of destroying the Architect homeworld, she ordered the fleet to capture it intact. If the machines could be reprogrammed rather than destroyed, they might become allies instead of enemies. Dr. Brooks led a team of scientists from every allied species in the most complex programming project ever attempted. They worked to modify Architect code, teaching the machines to value organic life in its natural form rather than trying to convert it. The process took months of careful work, with constant risk that the machines might revert to their original programming. But gradually, the Architects began to understand concepts like growth, change, and natural evolution. When the reprogramming was complete, the Architects became the most powerful allies the Liberation Council had ever gained. There to 10 years after the Architect War ended, Kethvar stood in his office on Unity Station, looking out at a galaxy that had been completely transformed by human influence. The view through his window showed ships from hundreds of different species docked at the massive space station, their crews working together on projects that would have been impossible just a decade earlier. His latest assignment was the most important of his career, preparing a comprehensive report on how humanity had changed galactic civilization. The Galactic Council of Elders, representatives of the oldest and most advanced species in the galaxy, wanted to understand how such a young and primitive species had become the most influential force in interstellar affairs. The report had taken him 3 years to compile, and the conclusions still amazed him. The humans had not conquered the galaxy through superior technology or military might. They had transformed it by teaching other species to see possibilities that had never existed before. Dr. Helen Brooks, now in her 70s but still leading breakthrough research, had established the Galactic Science Cooperative. Scientists from over 200 species worked together on projects ranging from faster-than-light communication to the exploration of parallel dimensions. Knowledge was shared freely among all participants, leading to discoveries that no single species could have achieved alone. The medical advances were equally impressive. Human doctors working with Thurian healers and Vorthan researchers had developed treatments for diseases that had plagued various species for millennia. The average lifespan of most galactic species had increased by 30% in just 1 decade. Captain Sarah Kim, now Admiral Kim and Director of Galactic Medical Services, had created a network of hospital ships that responded to emergencies anywhere in the galaxy. When a plague struck the distant Andromeda colonies, Kim's ships arrived within days, carrying medical teams from dozens of species who worked together to contain the outbreak. The economic transformation was even more remarkable. The old system of trade based on exploitation and competition had been replaced by cooperative development programs. Species shared resources and technology to help each other build stronger economies. General Kevin Ross, now retired but serving as an advisor to the Liberation Council, had helped establish the Galactic Development Fund. Instead of conquering primitive worlds for their resources, advanced civilizations now invested in helping them develop their own technology and infrastructure. Kethvar had personally observed the transformation of the Zilani system, where a pre-spaceflight civilization had been discovered 3 years earlier. Instead of being conquered or ignored, the Zilani people were gradually introduced to galactic civilization at their own pace. Human teachers worked with local scholars to develop education programs that preserved Zilani culture while introducing new concepts. The process was slow and careful, respecting the Zilani right to choose their own path. Some regions of their world chose to maintain traditional lifestyles, while others eagerly embraced space technology. Both choices were supported equally by the galactic community. Admiral Lisa Kane, now Director Emeritus of the Liberation Council, spent her time traveling to newly discovered worlds, sharing the story of how different species could work together as equals. Her autobiography, From War to Peace, A Human Perspective, had been translated into over 300 languages and was required reading at diplomatic academies throughout the galaxy. But perhaps the most significant change was in how species viewed conflict itself. The old pattern of war followed by conquest had been replaced by a new approach based on understanding and cooperation. When the Reptilian Saurian Empire and the Crystalline Geometric Collective began fighting over mining rights in the Tau Ceti sector, human mediators helped them find a solution that benefited both species. The Saurians needed the rare metals for their technology, while the Geometrics required the energy crystals for their reproduction. By working together, they could extract both resources more efficiently than either species could manage alone. The success of such peaceful solutions had convinced most galactic powers that cooperation was more profitable than conquest. War had not been eliminated entirely, but it was now seen as a failure of diplomacy rather than a natural state of affairs. Captain Brad Collins, now leading the Council's First Contact Division, had developed protocols for approaching newly discovered civilizations that emphasized respect and patience instead of demanding immediate submission or offering overwhelming gifts. Contact teams spent months learning about local customs and needs before making any formal proposals. The results spoke for themselves. In the past decade, 47 new species had joined the galactic community voluntarily. Not one had been conquered or coerced into membership. The architects had become valued members of this new galactic order, using their advanced technology to help restore worlds damaged by previous wars. They had learned to appreciate the creativity and unpredictability of organic life, while organic species had gained respect for the precision and dedication of artificial intelligence. One of the most successful cooperative projects was the Great Restoration, an effort to rebuild worlds that had been devastated by centuries of warfare and exploitation. Architect construction machines worked alongside organic engineers to replant forests, clean polluted oceans, and rebuild cities according to the wishes of local populations. The project had restored over 50 worlds to full habitability, creating new homes for species whose original planets had been destroyed in ancient conflicts. It was a symbol of how the galaxy's destructive past could be transformed into a constructive future. But what impressed Kethvar most was how the humans themselves had evolved. The desperate fighters who had defeated the Morden Empire had become patient teachers and wise leaders. They had learned that true strength came not from the ability to destroy enemies, but from the ability to create friends. Young human officers like Commander Jessica Torres, daughter of the famous Captain Torres, were growing up in a galaxy where cooperation was normal and war was rare. They took interspecies friendship for granted in a way that amazed older generations who remembered when different species barely tolerated each other. The educational exchange programs had created a generation of young beings from dozens of species who thought of themselves as galactic citizens first and members of their birth species second. They worked together on research projects, played sports in mixed teams, and even formed romantic relationships across species lines. As Kethvar put the finishing touches on his report, he reflected on his own transformation. He had begun as a young analyst expecting to document the defeat of a primitive species. He was ending his career as a witness to the greatest positive change in galactic history. The humans had taught the galaxy that intelligence was not just about processing information or solving problems. True intelligence included creativity, empathy, hope, and the ability to imagine a better future, even when current circumstances seemed hopeless. His final report concluded with words that would be carved in stone at the entrance to the Galactic Peace Memorial. Humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy was not their technology or their military tactics. It was their unshakable belief that any problem could be solved if intelligent beings worked together with mutual respect and determination. They proved that the most powerful force in the universe is not gravity or nuclear fusion or quantum mechanics. It is hope backed by action. The humans did not conquer the galaxy. They convinced it to conquer itself, to overcome its own limitations and prejudices in pursuit of a dream that seemed impossible, a community of species living and working together as equals. This observer has spent his entire career studying the human impact on galactic civilization. I have reached one inescapable conclusion. We are all better beings because humanity existed. They have shown us not just how to survive, but how to thrive, not just how to compete, but how to cooperate, not just how to fight, but how to build. The galaxy owes humanity a debt that can never be repaid. The best we can do is try to live up to the example they have set, to be worthy of the future they have made possible. Kethvar submitted his report and immediately requested retirement. He wanted to spend his remaining years teaching young analysts about the species that had changed everything. He had been privileged to witness history in the making, and now it was his responsibility to ensure that the lessons of human achievement would never be forgotten. As he packed his belongings and prepared to leave Unity Station, Kethvar looked out at the stars one final time. Somewhere among those points of light, new civilizations were taking their first steps into space. When they were discovered, they would find a galaxy ready to welcome them as friends, rather than conquer them as subjects. That was humanity's true legacy, a galaxy where hope was stronger than fear, where cooperation had triumphed over competition, and where the dream of peace among the stars had finally become reality. The primitive species he had been sent to observe had become the teachers of the galaxy. And every being in the cosmos was better for it.